Hello and welcome to The Context USA with me, Katrina Perry in Washington.
And me, Lewis Vaughan-Jones in London. And tonight we're focusing on the breaking news that the BBC has apologised to President Trump over a documentary that spliced together parts of his speech on the day of the Capitol riots.
Joining us on our panel tonight, Annika Green, former speechwriter for President George W. Bush, and Gavin Reynolds, former speechwriter for Vice President Kamala Harris. Welcome to you both.
Welcome to The Context USA. We're going to start with this breaking news, of course. The BBC has apologised to President Trump for a Panorama episode on the events of January the 6th, which spliced parts of his speech together. The corporation says it will not show the programme again, but has rejected his demands for compensation. OK, let's bring you the BBC's statement. Lawyers for the BBC have written to President Trump's legal team in response to a letter received on Sunday. And the quote is, BBC Chair Samir Shah has separately sent a personal letter to the White House, making clear to President Trump that he and the corporation are sorry for the edit of the president's speech of the 6th of January 2021, which featured on the programme. The BBC has no plans to rebroadcast the documentary Trump a Second Chance on any BBC platforms. And while the BBC sincerely regrets the manner in which the video clip was edited, we strongly disagree there is a basis for a defamation claim.
Well, this statement comes after President Trump said he had an obligation to sue the BBC over the way a section of his speech had been edited. He claimed the coverage, quote, defrauded the public, and he accused the BBC of dishonesty.
Well, our culture and media editor Katie Razzle gave me her reaction to the news of the BBC apology.
The way I take this, there's been a lot of debate about this and about what the BBC will do in the face of what looked like quite an aggressive legal letter, as often legal letters are, from Donald Trump's legal spokesperson, saying this had caused serious financial and reputational harm to him, this edit. He's obviously given interviews since. He believes that the BBC is biased, and he's been saying it, and his spokeswoman has been saying, don't watch the BBC, watch GB News, and all of that. So it's been very... he's been very strong, and people were talking about what would the BBC do? How will the BBC respond to this? It's already apologised for the edit, so it's already said we made a mistake. Does that mean that potentially millions of pounds of taxpayers' money, well, public money that comes into the BBC through the licence fee, is going to be spent settling with Donald Trump, rather than, to avoid a $1 billion lawsuit, which is what he was threatening? Now, if you look at this is the BBC very strongly defending its ground. So they are saying, yes, we apologise and we're sorry it happened. We did it unintentionally. We didn't mean to mislead, but we accept we did. And he had asked for a retraction. Now, that programme, the Panorama programme, is already not up on the iPlayer and hasn't been because they come off after a year, and it came out in October last year. But it is saying this programme will never be broadcast again. So it's done two of the things he wanted, because he wanted an apology and he wants a retraction. But the third and the crucial thing was the financial side of things. And the BBC is saying very firmly, absolutely not. We do not think you have a legal case. You do not have a defamation case. And therefore, we are not offering you any money. And
And we've been speaking, obviously, over the last few days to different legal experts, in the US and in the UK as well. And many have cited challenges for the Trump team in able to actually get across the threshold of defamation here, especially in the US, given they are the First Amendment, and all those cases tend to be quite challenging anyway.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we know that two things have happened. We've had this personal letter of apology to Donald Trump, but then there is a legal letter that has gone out. And my understanding is that that does lay out the main arguments for why the BBC does not think that the lawyers are right in Florida, where this has come from, and that Donald Trump has a defamation case. So the first point that they make is that the BBC did not have the rights to and did not distribute the Panorama programme on American channels. And they point out that when it was on the iPlayer, it was geographically restricted to viewers in the UK. So they say, for one, essentially what they're saying there is people couldn't have watched it in America on any of the American channels. So that makes a difference, because if Donald Trump is claiming it would affect American voters, for example, because it was put out ahead of the election, well, they're saying it couldn't have done that. They say he was talking in this legal letter, it was about the injury and overwhelming reputational and financial harm to Donald Trump. And the BBC is saying in this letter, it didn't cause you overwhelming reputational or financial harm, effectively because you were re-elected. So where's the harm? Then there's this talk about malice, whether it was malicious. What they're arguing, the BBC, in this legal letter, is that the editing of that clip, it was used to convey a much broader point about what happened on the day and how that speech was received at the time. And they're pointing out it wasn't designed to mislead anybody. It was simply an edit made to shorten a long speech into a shorter, tiny bit of speech and convey the way the speech landed. It wasn't done with malice. It was done, they say, by someone who thought they were condensing Donald Trump's message. They're also pointing out that the clip was never intended to be considered in isolation. So we have pored over that clip, haven't we, over the last few days since this emerged. The BBC saying it is 12 seconds of an hour-long programme. And that programme, and I've watched it, I don't know if you have, but it's a programme that followed Donald Trump's supporters and contained lots of pro-Donald Trump messages within it. So they're saying you can't consider it in isolation. This was a programme where we heard a lot from people about why they support Donald Trump and why they follow him and why they wanted him to be president. And then their last argument in this legal letter is a slightly more technical one, but essentially it's very hard in America. The threshold for defamation, if you're a political figure in the US, is really high. And so what the BBC lawyers are saying is, under US law, it's sort of put like this: an opinion on a matter of public concern and political speech is heavily protected under defamation law in the US. But essentially the bottom line is they are standing their ground and they're saying, you don't have a legal case, we're not giving you any money.
Well, let's bring in now former editor-at-large and political editor at Sky News, Adam Bolton. Adam, thanks for joining us here on BBC News. Just want to get your view on this latest development, this personal letter from the chair of the BBC to President Trump, in addition to a legal letter responding to his personal letter. Is that the response that would have been expected from BBC News?
Well, I think there was always the possibility that the BBC would seek to reach some sort of financial settlement. And I say that simply because we have seen that with some other news organizations, American news organizations. I think it's a positive sign that the BBC hasn't done that, although, of course, potentially it puts their commercial operations at risk in the United States, where BBC America is popular. And also it raises the question as to whether the White House might take sanctions against the BBC correspondents and the people trying to cover the BBC, work for the BBC covering Donald Trump in America. But I think, what they've done is what a self-respecting organization should do, conceded that there was an error towards Donald Trump, that it's legitimate for him to complain, legitimate for him to expect an apology. And I suspect many people will say, why wasn't this done a long time ago, given the exposure which it left the BBC to ever since back in February, where the issue was first raised with the board. It puts the ball very firmly back in Donald Trump's court, which is not necessarily a position which he likes to be in. He likes to, bully is perhaps the wrong word, but impose himself from on high and get a rapid response, a sort of tribute to his leadership. He clearly hasn't got that, and that would be interesting. He may, however, looking at the BBC arguments about how this programme was not seen in the United States, and therefore couldn't have really damaged his reputation with the American electorate in the way he suggests, he may decide at this point to call it quits. But That's quite a big supposition, because both he and Caroline Leavitt, his spokesman, as we know, can be pretty outspoken, and they've certainly been very outspoken attacking the BBC.